This is the perfect millennial family movie. And that's probably giving my opinion away too soon. Don't click away yet. I do have more stuff to talk about, so let's talk about Detective Pikachu. So for the sake of my sanity, and to make sure that this doesn't turn into a rambling, nonsensical review, this is going to be broken into 4 parts. It's going to be the good, the bad, the technical, and the conclusion. So let's get right into the good. So first off, this movie is extremely well balanced. Everything has a good mix of heart, drama, emotion, action, comedy, all of that. And it doesn't feel like you're being forced between one emotion to another between scenes. Each moment kind of leads the viewer into the emotion that they're supposed to be feeling instead of forcing you into it with some sort of musical cue or like just throwing a bunch of sad stuff on the screen. You actually feel like you know where you should be emotionally with each scene. And the action also happens in a way that makes sense. It's sudden in some moments, but it doesn't feel so sudden that you're just thrown into it with no context. Everything just has a nice flow to it, and it does such a good job of carrying the viewer along, and it doesn't lose the viewer until the very end, but that's actually supposed to lose the viewer for a little while until you piece it together, but that's going to get into spoiler territory, and I'm not going to do that yet. The next good thing that stood out to me was the fact that the characters are very well written, but they also have really good chemistry. Now, I know that sounds kind of obvious to have well-written characters, but well-written characters, if done correctly with a good writer, shouldn't be too difficult to do. But on-screen chemistry is very difficult to actually obtain because that doesn't rely so much on the writer as it does on the actors. And Justice Smith, who plays Tim Goodman, who's our main character, and Ryan Reynolds, who obviously plays Pikachu, they have probably the best on-screen chemistry of any character, which makes sense because they're the ones who spend the most time interacting with one another. And Justice Smith especially, it's crazy to me that they have such good on-screen chemistry, and Justice Smith is doing it while acting alongside a CG character. Actually, tons of CG characters if you think about it. There are tons of CG characters, but specifically his interaction with Pikachu. The jokes back and forth fit perfectly, the emotional moments feel genuine and grounded in reality, and just everything feels so well polished, and even random offshoot characters like Tim's friend at the beginning of the movie, the way that they talk to one another and interact actually feels like they've known each other as long as the movie is trying to make you believe that they've known each other. And all of those little things, the little emotional moments here, the way that the characters interact with each other over there, these little things all come together to help you and I, as the viewers, engage in this world, engage in their struggles and their relationships, and just makes everything feel that much more realistic for us as the viewers. But for viewers who are my age or around my age and grew up in the same time period as I did, engaging in these characters and engaging in this world probably isn't the hardest thing in the world for us to do for one main big reason. And that big reason is the third good thing about this movie. It's a Pokemon movie, and it's a Pokemon movie that knows its audience. It knew its audience before they even came into the theaters. And why did it know its audience so well? Because who watches or watched Pokemon? People my age, people like me who grew up in the 90s, or some who are slightly younger who grew up in the early 2000s and have watched Pokemon, potentially outgrew Pokemon, and with the movies and this movie specifically and some of the games that are out now, are kind of rediscovering Pokemon and getting back into it, sort of like the main character of the movie, our protagonist, who also outgrew Pokemon and then through the course of this movie re-engaged. Almost like they wrote the character to be somebody that we can relate to on a personal level. Nice. I guess that does actually help us as older viewers who may not be into Pokemon as much as we used to be. That helps us engage in the world more because we can relate on a personal level. Not just emotional, I get what he's going through. We can personally relate to this character. That is actually really cool. So essentially the target audience was us or kids who are still into Pokemon and its ever-growing entourage of 807. Are you really? There were 151 when I was a kid. God, I feel old now. And I'm sure there are a few parents who were into it because their kids were into it, but the main audience were people my age and younger who grew up with this franchise. And it caters to its viewers so well without pandering or making us feel like we're watching just one giant fan service fest. If you guys watch my anime reviews, you know that I really don't like fan service, sexual or otherwise, and exaggerating a subject to kind of push it into the viewer's face and be like, look what we did, that is also a very, very common and bad form of fan service. And it's also a really, really quick way to drive away potential new viewers and lose a lot of long-term viewers because we don't want to be pandered to. But Detective Pikachu doesn't do that. Everything fits like a well-made puzzle. The obvious references feel well integrated into the story, and even the sort of more obvious but funny references don't feel like pandering, like this one.
Teach Pokemon to understand the power that's inside Pokemon.
And the more obscure references feel so well placed. Like, it feels like the writers were just giving a solid nod to anybody who's been watching this franchise for a long time. Like, for example, did you know that the Mewtwo in this movie is canon the Mewtwo from the first Pokemon movie? And you know this because they make reference to the fact that this Mewtwo escaped from a lab 20 years ago. And when this movie came out, the first Pokemon movie was 20 years old. That is such an incredible attention to detail that you can tell that the writers either consulted Pokemon fans or were hardcore Pokemon fans themselves. Like, it's little attentions to detail like that that just make it, God, makes it so cool. I'm nerding out. Sorry, let me get back into what I was talking about. The point is, this movie knows its fan base, but it's not unapproachable for those who don't really know the fan base. It's a fun mystery movie, but if you are a true Pokemon fan, you get more out of this movie than your casual run-of-the-mill moviegoer. So they made a movie based on a long-running franchise that has so much lore and backstory, but made it approachable to the average moviegoer. That's actually pretty impressive, especially when you consider that the MCU has been going for 11 years and has a phenomenally large fan base. But anybody just now getting into it is immediately alienated because you now have 11 years of solid backstory that every movie references. So you feel lost if you haven't been watching it from the start. Yeah, so I guess making an approachable movie that's based on a long-running franchise is actually pretty hard. So good job, Detective Pikachu. Okay, so I know that I just spent all this time raving about the stuff that I liked about this movie, but everything has its bad stuff. And this bad stuff is my opinion. I know that some people aren't going to agree with me, but these comments are mine, and these are what I think. And you can leave a comment down below if you have other things you don't like, things you don't agree with. That's the point. It's an open platform. But either way, these are my thoughts on the bad things. Let's get started. The first thing is kind of small, but it's one of those things that I kind of noticed after I watched it a few times. It never actually feels like a genuine Pokemon adventure. I know the whole point is to make it feel like this noir mystery, but something that actually keeps the Pokemon long-term viewers coming back is the fact that it's always an adventure. The games, the TV shows, the older movies, all of them involved some sort of adventure, and we never really go on a long adventure. Like, believe me, I love the mystery noir kind of feel to it, but I just would have loved to see more locations. Like, the only settings we ever get are Tim's hometown for a little bit, Rhyme City for most of the movie, the lab where they kept Mewtwo, and the field and area surrounding that lab. And that was basically it. So I guess while they don't show a ton of locations, they do make the most of these locations, especially considering how well they blend Pokemon into each of these locations and make them feel like they're part of the world. So it's bad, but it's definitely not the worst offender on this list. Now, the second one is probably going to ruffle some feathers, but in my opinion, Howard Clifford's plan makes no sense and follows none of the established rules from the existing franchise. Okay, so this part of the review is either going to show how long I've been out of the Pokemon fan base, or it's going to make me sound extremely petty. Either way, it's not going to end well for me, but we are getting into spoiler territory, so skip to this time in the video if you don't want to get spoiled. Alright, so if you haven't skipped, we're getting into spoilers. His plan is to swap bodies with Mewtwo and then fuse human souls with their Pokemon. What? Like, I know I haven't followed Pokemon in a while, but I'm pretty sure that Mewtwo can't do that. And just to be certain, I did some research. I went and I looked up what Mewtwo's powers were from Generation 1 all the way to Generation 7, and none of the powers listed looked even remotely like that. So, like, where is this coming from all of a sudden? I almost feel like the writers just kind of used Mewtwo as a plot engine and just said, well, he's the most powerful Pokemon around, so what does he do? I don't know, we have this story, so let's just write a power in for him because he's the most powerful Pokemon, so let's just have him do that. Why not? It's like the writers making this the plan the whole time and then just writing in an ability for Mewtwo, just, it kind of took me out of the movie, especially considering that it was at the end. That really sucks because everything leading up to that point in the movie was phenomenal. The twists and turns, the plot twists, the action, everything fit perfectly, or almost perfectly. But then this happens and it just kind of took me out of the movie at the end. And it just seems so random, this, trade souls and evolve thing. The whole thing just kind of landed like a gymnast with a broken ankle. It was flat, hard to watch, and very unceremonious. And it turns out it was actually a core part of the overall story because Tim's dad had his soul swapped with a Pikachu, so that's actually something that was already a part of the movie from the very beginning, and we only learned about it right at the end, and it was a twist. Now, it wasn't a bad twist. It didn't just suddenly, slap you in the face and go, here's what's going on. At least that was sort of well-wrapped, but the sudden Bill Nye plan of, or not Bill Nye, but you get what I mean. I just see him as Bill Nye. His whole plan just completely threw me off. Sorry. It's just frustrating, and it feels so abrupt, though the twist reveal with Tim's dad is a little bit better than Bill Nye's plan, which I guess is okay, so the bad mainly just falls on Bill Nye's side, not on Tim's dad's side, which is good because Bill Nye's the bad guy. Writing. That's how that works. Alright, welcome back, spoiler skippers. We're getting right into the third bad thing about this movie. And it's not a big one, it's pretty small as well, but it's one that really forced me to stretch my suspension of disbelief. It didn't break it, but it came close. Ryan Reynolds riffing. I'm probably not the first reviewer to bring this up, but I'll do it anyway. I get that he's the Hollywood comedy man right now, especially with things like Deadpool being out, and it is cool to see his style of humor being tailored to life as a Pokemon, but it just feels like they run on a little bit too long. It almost feels like they just kind of let him go and then just cut everything together to make it work later, and it makes some of the scenes work, but it then also makes some of the other scenes feel dragged a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, though. The genuine character moments, the moments where he's actually acting in a serious manner alongside Tim, is really well done. And I think that's mostly to do with the script writing and how good of an actor Ryan Reynolds can be when you don't just let him riff on his own jokes. But I feel like some of the moments were good, broken up by bad jokes. But that's not to say all the jokes were bad. Some of the jokes were actually pretty good, and some of them even had plot significance, like this one during the Mr. Mime scene.
I can. Shoving, pushing. My problem is that I push people away and then hate them for leaving.
That has such a huge meaning that we only discover towards the very end of the movie. So some of the jokes that were written in, I'm assuming those were written in, are actually really good, and some of his riffs are funny, but I just wish they had kind of taken a lot of the Ryan Reynolds length jokes and cut them back a little bit, because otherwise you have to stretch your suspension of disbelief almost to the point of breaking, and that is a very fast way to start to, thankfully not entirely, but start to pull people out of the movie. If you ever break the suspension of disbelief for somebody in a movie, you're doing something wrong. That's a pro tip. So now that we have story out of the way, both the good and the bad, we get to get into things that I find genuinely fascinating, which is the technical parts. I know it doesn't sound super interesting, but I hopefully can make it sound more interesting for you. I'm a film nerd. What do you want? So this movie, on so many levels, is just mind-blowing from a visual effects aspect, but also from a film technique aspect. The style they use is so cool. So this movie is shot in an anamorphic format. Good examples of anamorphic movies would be things like The Force Awakens, most of the Star Trek films. Blade Runner is another great example. Essentially what this technique does is stretches a wide film format like what we're used to seeing in the theaters and sort of squishes it down onto a 35mm piece of film. It requires a very specific type of lens, and it ends up doing some pretty cool stuff. Some of the resulting effects include things like very harsh glares that really help frame up certain shots, and things like background bokeh end up looking really, really cool. It's just a really cool way to make a unique looking film, which the more they use anamorphic film, the less it's going to be unique, but enjoy these movies while anamorphic film is still unique. But on top of all this, they're using these really cool film techniques that are really difficult to replicate digitally, and they're putting CG characters into the film. Like, that is incredible. Like this moment here, right here. They changed focus in the shot pretty dramatically with Pokemon in the shot. Like when I saw this, it blew my mind. Now something else that stood out to me about this movie was how photorealistic these Pokemon looked, and that came as no surprise to me once I discovered that the character designers had been working on these Pokemon for a year before they even started shooting the movie. But they aren't just photorealistic, they interact with the environment in such a natural way. I've actually been watching this series called VFX Artists React, and they do an entire video explaining this way better than I ever could. So I'll leave a link in the description to that video. So if you guys want to know what makes these Pokemon feel so realistic in the world they're in, you can check that out. It's really cool. These guys are professionals, so they actually know how to explain it. I just know that photorealistic Pokemon look really cool in a real world environment. But overall, like the design, the way the fur moves, the skin moves, the way they interact with the environment as a whole and integrate well and don't feel like they're out of place, all of that stuff just makes this movie such a fascinating technical achievement, and it makes everything, all the Pokemon in this movie, just feel tangible, makes it feel like it's something that could actually exist, and I love it. So at the start of this video I said that this was the perfect millennial family movie, and I meant that. Also, thanks for watching this long if you have. But what exactly do I mean by that? Well, it speaks to a very specific group of people. People my age and kids. And I feel like this movie is going to have a profound impact on those two groups of people. I'll give you an example. Parents always have movies that their parents showed them, and they bring those movies and show them to their kids when they're old enough. And they also have movies that they discover as they grow up, that they enjoy, that they show to their kids. And the pattern continues on and on and on. And I feel like this movie will be one of those movies for our generation. It's going to be a movie where we'll have films that our parents discovered that we'll show to our kids, but then we'll also have this movie that we'll show to our kids as well, and they may very well show this to their kids in the future. So what I'm trying to say is that I feel like this movie will be one of those movies that kids will watch in the future with their parents, us, as we grow into adulthood, and it will probably go down for us in our generation as a classic. And at the end of the day, even if it doesn't do that, it still has the honor of saying that it's the most successful video game movie to ever hit the screens. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I put a lot of work into it. It took me forever to actually sit down and record this movie, but I'm going to try to actually make this a continuous thing. Once every week I'm going to review a movie instead of just doing a Funny Friday, and this will be the new series, Feature Length Friday. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and apart from that, let me know if I missed anything, if you guys agreed, disagreed, whatever. And apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.